The shuttle touched down on Catha Prime with a soft hiss of landing thrusters. Commander Jake Morrison looked out through the small window at the alien landscape before him. Purple mountains rose in the distance, their peaks covered in what looked like crystal formations. The sky was a deep orange color, and two suns hung overhead like glowing eyes. "First time seeing a Kethany world," said Dr. Lisa Carter, checking her equipment one more time. She was a small woman with brown hair tied back in a neat bun. Her job was to study alien life forms, and she had been excited about this mission for months. "Let's hope it's not our last," muttered Lieutenant Ben Hayes from the pilot's seat. He was a tall man with short black hair and suspicious eyes. As the team's security chief, he didn't trust anyone easily, especially aliens they had never met before. Morrison stood up and straightened his blue diplomatic uniform. At 42 years old, he had seen many worlds during his career, but this felt different. The Kethany had been mysterious for years, rarely speaking to other species. When they finally sent a message to Earth asking for peace talks, everyone was surprised. "Remember, we're here to make friends," Morrison said to his team. "Earth needs allies, and the Kethany control 3 star systems. If we can get them to trade with us, it would help millions of people back home." The shuttle door opened with a loud clang. Hot air rushed in, carrying strange smells that made Morrison's nose wrinkle. The landing pad was made of black stone, polished smooth as glass. Strange plants with silver leaves grew in neat rows along the edges. A group of Kethany warriors waited for them. Morrison had seen pictures before, but seeing them in person was different. They stood 7 feet tall, with green scaly skin that looked tough as armor. Their heads were shaped like lizards, with yellow eyes that seemed to see everything. They wore dark metal armor that gleamed in the sunlight. The leader stepped forward. Morrison could tell he was important because his armor had gold markings on it. When he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel rolling down a hill. "Welcome, humans. I am Captain Vexstar of the Royal Guard. Queen Zarathic waits for you in the palace." Morrison bowed slightly, the way the diplomatic training had taught him. "Thank you, Captain. I'm Commander Morrison, and this is my team. We're honored to be here." Vexstar's yellow eyes studied Morrison for a long moment. Then he looked at Dr. Carter and Lieutenant Hayes. Morrison noticed that the captain's hand never moved far from the weapon at his side. "Follow me," Vexstar said. "Do not wander from the path." They walked across the landing pad toward a massive building in the distance. Morrison had never seen anything like it. The palace was made entirely of crystal, but not the clear kind he knew from Earth. This crystal was deep purple, and it seemed to glow with its own inner light. Tall spires reached toward the sky, and strange symbols were carved into the walls. "How do they make crystal that big?" Dr. Carter whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "Trade secrets," Hayes said quietly. "Notice how many guards are around? I count at least 20, and those are just the ones I can see." Morrison had noticed. 2. Kethany warriors stood at every corner, on every balcony, and along every wall. Their weapons looked advanced, probably energy-based. The message was clear: the humans were guests, but they were also watched. As they walked, Morrison tried to remember everything he knew about Kethany culture. They valued strength above all else. Their society was built around honor and combat. They had never lost a war, and they had never backed down from a fight. Some people called them the perfect warriors. The palace entrance was guarded by 2 massive Kethany, even bigger than the others. They wore black armor instead of dark metal, and their weapons were twice the size of normal ones. They didn't speak, but their eyes followed every movement the humans made. Inside the palace, Morrison felt like he was walking through a dream. The walls were covered in murals showing great battles. Kethany warriors fought against creatures Morrison didn't recognize, some with tentacles, others with multiple heads. In every picture, the Kethany were winning. "They really like their war stories," Hayes said under his breath. The throne room was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Morrison couldn't see the top. Crystal pillars supported the roof, and each one was carved with more battle scenes. Hundreds of Kethany nobles stood along the walls, all watching the humans with interest. At the far end of the room, on a throne made of black stone, sat Queen Zarathik. She was the largest Kethany Morrison had ever seen, probably 8 feet tall. Her scales were darker than the others, almost black, and her eyes were bright red instead of yellow. She wore a crown made of the same crystal as the palace walls. "Approach," the queen commanded. Her voice was deeper than the captain's, and it echoed through the huge room. Morrison walked forward, his footsteps loud on the stone floor. Dr. Carter and Lieutenant Hayes followed close behind. When they were about 10 feet from the throne, Morrison stopped and bowed again. "Your Majesty, I'm Commander Morrison of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. We come in peace, hoping to build friendship between our peoples." Queen Zarathik leaned forward, studying Morrison like a scientist examining a bug. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. "Human warriors are supposed to be fearsome, but you look weak." Morrison felt his team tense up behind him, but he kept his voice calm. "We prefer to solve problems with words rather than weapons, Your Majesty. We believe that working together makes everyone stronger." Several Cathany nobles made sounds that might have been laughter. The queen raised her hand, and the room fell silent. "Words," she repeated. "In my empire, actions speak louder than words, but you have traveled far to reach us. You will be our guests for 7 days. We will feast, we will talk, and we will see what kind of beings you truly are." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the way she said, "See what kind of beings you truly are," didn't sound like normal diplomatic language. "Thank you for your hospitality, Your Majesty," Morrison said. "We look forward to learning about your culture." The queen made a gesture, and Captain Vextar stepped forward. "You will be shown to your quarters. Tonight we feast in your honor." As they were led away, Morrison noticed that the Cathany nobles were still watching them. Some were whispering to each other, but Morrison couldn't understand their language. The way they looked at the humans reminded him of people at a zoo, staring at strange animals. Their quarters were comfortable enough. 3 rooms connected by a common area, with furniture sized for humans. The walls were the same crystal as the rest of the palace, but they had been tinted to let in softer light. "I don't like this," Hayes said as soon as they were alone. "Did you see how they looked at us like we were dinner?" Dr. Carter was already scanning the walls with her equipment. "I'm not picking up any listening devices, but that doesn't mean they're not there." "Jake, something feels wrong about this whole situation." Morrison nodded. He had the same feeling. The queen's words kept echoing in his mind. "We'll be careful," he said. "But we need to give this a chance. If we can make allies of the Kethany, it could change everything for Earth." Outside their window, the alien suns were starting to set. The purple mountains looked like sleeping giants in the distance. Morrison watched Kethany guards patrol the palace grounds below. They moved with the easy confidence of people who had never met an enemy they couldn't defeat. Morrison just hoped that confidence wouldn't be put to the test during their visit. The feast hall was filled with the sounds of celebration. Hundreds of Cathany nobles sat at long tables, eating meat that Morrison didn't recognize and drinking from cups made of polished metal. The air was thick with smoke from cooking fires, and the strange spices the aliens used in their food. Morrison sat at the high table next to Queen Zarathik. Dr. Carter and Lieutenant Hayes were seated nearby, both looking uncomfortable. The Cathany food was edible, but it tasted like nothing they had ever tried before. Everything was either too spicy or too bitter. "Tell me about your wars," Queen Zarathik said, cutting into a piece of meat with claws that looked sharp enough to cut steel. "What enemies have your people defeated?" Morrison chose his words carefully. "We've had conflicts, Your Majesty, but we prefer to remember the peace that followed. Wars cause suffering for everyone involved." The queen's red eyes glowed with interest. "Suffering makes warriors stronger. My people have fought for 1,000 years. Each battle taught us something new about survival." Around the table, other Kethany nobles nodded in agreement. They began telling stories of their own battles, describing fights with creatures that sounded like nightmares. Morrison noticed that every story ended the same way. with the Kethany winning through superior strength and courage. "What about you, female?" one of the nobles asked, looking at Dr. Carter. "Are human females warriors too?" Dr. Carter looked surprised to be addressed directly. "I'm a scientist, not a warrior. I study life forms and try to understand how they work." The noble made a sound that might have been laughter. "You study life by watching it die in battle?" "No," Carter said firmly. "I study life by learning how it survives, how it adapts, how it grows. There's more to existence than fighting." The table fell quiet. Several Kethany exchanged glances that Morrison didn't like. Queen Zarathic leaned back in her chair, studying Carter with new interest. "Interesting," the Queen said. "You believe survival comes from understanding rather than strength?" "Both are important," Carter replied. "But understanding usually lasts longer than strength." For the rest of the evening, Morrison noticed the Kethany nobles whispering among themselves. They kept looking at the humans and making gestures that seemed meaningful, but Morrison couldn't understand what they meant. The second day started with a tour of the palace. Captain Vextar led them through halls filled with weapons and armor from past battles. Every piece had a story, usually involving the death of some enemy who had challenged the Kethany. "Your people must be very proud of their military history," Morrison said as they walked past a display of alien skulls. "Pride comes from victory," Vextar replied. "Those who cannot defend themselves do not deserve to survive." Hayes stepped closer to Morrison. "Boss, I'm getting a really bad feeling about this place. Look at how they display their trophies. These aren't just weapons, they're warnings." Morrison had noticed the same thing. The palace wasn't just a home for the royal family. It was a museum of conquest. Every room told the story of another species that had faced the Kethany and lost. On the third day, everything changed. Queen Zarathic called them to the throne room in the morning. This time, the room was filled with even more Kethany nobles than before. They stood in perfect rows, their armor gleaming in the crystal light. The atmosphere felt different, more formal and more dangerous. "Commander Morrison," the Queen began, her voice echoing through the hall, "for 3 days you have been our guests. You have eaten our food, seen our home, and learned our customs. Now it is time for truth." Morrison felt his heart start beating. "Foster, Your Majesty? There can be no alliance between our peoples without understanding," the Queen continued. "In the Kethany Empire, all potential allies must prove their worth through the trial of 3 challenges. This is our way. This has always been our way." The room erupted in sounds of approval from the assembled nobles. Morrison looked back at his team. Dr. Carter's face had gone pale, and Lieutenant Hayes had moved his hand closer to his weapon. "What kind of challenges?" Morrison asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Queen Zarathic smiled, showing teeth that looked like they could tear through metal. "The first challenge tests the mind under pressure. The second tests skill in combat. The third tests the spirit of leadership. Each member of your team will face 1 challenge." Morrison's mind raced. This wasn't what they had come here for. "Your Majesty, we came here for peaceful negotiations. We're diplomats, not warriors." "Peace without strength is meaningless," the Queen replied. "If you cannot protect yourselves, you cannot protect your allies. If you refuse the challenges, you will be declared enemies of the Kethany Empire." The threat was clear. Morrison looked around the room at the hundreds of armed Kethany warriors. Even if they tried to run, they would never make it back to their shuttle. "We accept your challenges," Morrison said. He had no choice. The Queen's smile grew wider. "Excellent. Dr. Carter will face the first challenge immediately." 2 Kethany guards stepped forward and gestured for Carter to follow them. She looked at Morrison with frightened eyes, but she walked forward bravely. They led her to a side chamber where a strange device waited. It looked like a metal box covered in symbols, with several openings in its sides. Cables ran from the box to what looked like a control panel. "This is the mind maze," explained one of the guards. "You must solve the puzzle to escape. But be warned, the device will try to stop you." "Many have tried. Most have failed." Dr. Carter examined the device carefully. "What happens if I fail?" Then you prove that humans are too weak to be our allies, the guard replied. Carter took a deep breath and approached the device. As soon as she touched it, the symbols began to glow. The room filled with a high-pitched humming sound. Morrison watched from the doorway as Carter worked. The device seemed to be some kind of puzzle that required her to manipulate different parts in the right order. But every time she made progress, the machine would do something new to stop her. First, the floor began to tilt, making it hard for her to keep her balance. Then jets of hot air started shooting from the walls. The device was designed to make thinking difficult while she tried to solve it, but Carter didn't give up. She used her scientific training to study the machine's patterns. When the floor tilted, she braced herself against the wall. When the hot air blasted, she moved to where it was cooler. Slowly, step by step, she figured out how the puzzle worked. The Kethany guards watched in surprise as Carter's hands moved quickly over the controls. She was thinking faster than they had expected, adapting to each new obstacle the machine presented. Finally, after what felt like hours, the device made a different sound. The symbols stopped glowing and the humming died away. Dr. Carter had solved the mind maze. The guards looked at each other in amazement. No alien has ever solved it that quickly, one of them said. Carter walked back to Morrison, sweat covering her face but smiling with pride. Human scientists are trained to think under pressure, she said. We had to learn that to survive on our own planet, Queen Zarathik nodded approvingly. Impressive. Now for the second challenge. This time, they called for Lieutenant Hayes. He was led to a different chamber, this one set up like a fighting arena. Sand covered the floor, and weapons hung on the walls. A single Kethany warrior waited in the center. This is Warrior Kethron, the Queen announced. He will test your combat skills. The fight continues until one of you yields or cannot continue. Hayes looked at his opponent. Kethron was typical for his species, 7 feet tall, covered in tough scales and armed with muscles that looked like they could crush steel. He held a weapon that looked like a cross between a sword and a club. Any rules? Hayes asked. Victory is the only rule, Kethron replied, his voice a low growl. The fight began immediately. Kethron charged forward, swinging his weapon in a wide arc that would have taken Hayes' head off. But Hayes wasn't there when the weapon arrived. He had rolled to the side and come up behind the alien. What followed was unlike anything the watching Kethany had seen before. Hayes didn't try to match Kethron's strength. Instead, he used speed and tactics. He struck quickly and then moved away before the alien could respond. He used the arena itself as a weapon, kicking sand into his opponents' eyes and using the walls to change direction. Kethron grew frustrated. He was used to enemies who either ran away in fear or tried to match his strength directly. Hayes did neither. He fought like someone who had studied many different enemies and learned from each one. Finally, Hayes saw his chance. When Kethron made a particularly wild swing, Hayes grabbed the alien's arm and used his own momentum against him. Kethron crashed into the arena wall and dropped his weapon before the alien could recover. Hayes had the weapon pointed at his throat. Do you yield? Hayes asked. Kethron looked up at him with something that might have been respect. I yield, he said. The watching Kethany erupted in surprised voices. Their warrior had been defeated by a human half his size. Queen Zarathik's eyes glowed brighter than before. 2 challenges passed, she said, but the third is the most important. Commander Morrison, you will face General Thokvar tomorrow at dawn. He is our greatest warrior, undefeated in 300 battles. Morrison felt his stomach drop. He had hoped that passing the first 2 challenges would be enough, but now he realized the truth. Morrison woke before dawn, his mind racing with thoughts of the coming battle. He had spent most of the night studying what little information he could gather about General Thokvar. The stories the Kethany told were terrifying. 300 victories, no defeats. Enemies who had fled at the mere sight of him. Dr. Carter knocked softly on his door. Jake, are you awake? Come in, Morrison said, sitting up on the crystal bed that had been uncomfortable all night. Carter entered with Lieutenant Hayes behind her. Both looked worried. We've been talking, Carter said. There has to be another way out of this. Hayes nodded. I've been watching the guards. They're confident, maybe too confident. If we move fast, we might be able to reach the shuttle. Morrison shook his head. Even if we could get past the guards, they'd shoot us down before we cleared the atmosphere. And then Earth would never know what happened here. So what do we do? Carter asked. Morrison stood and walked to the window. Outside, he could see HFY workers setting up an arena in the palace courtyard. Thousands of aliens were already gathering, their scales glinting in the early morning light. This wasn't just a challenge, it was entertainment. We do what we came here to do, Morrison said. We show them what humans are capable of. Jake, this General Thokvar isn't like the warrior Ben fought yesterday, Carter said. From what I've heard, he's killed things that would give nightmares to nightmares. Morrison turned back to his team. Then we'd better hope that 300 victories have made him overconfident. An hour later, Captain Vextar arrived to escort Morrison to the arena. The courtyard had been transformed into a circular fighting pit surrounded by stone seats. Morrison estimated that at least 10,000 had gathered to watch. Their voices created a low rumble that made the ground vibrate. The entire population of the capital city has come to see this, Vextar said, sounding almost apologetic. General Thokvar's battles are legendary. They have not seen him fight in many years. Morrison was led to a small chamber beneath the arena. The walls were covered with weapons of every shape and size. Some looked like swords, others like clubs, and many were things Morrison couldn't identify. You may choose any weapon, Vextar explained. Or you may fight with your hands. The choice is yours. Morrison examined the weapons carefully. They were all designed for beings much larger and stronger than humans. Even the smallest sword was too heavy for him to use effectively. I'll fight. Without weapons, Morrison said. Vextar's eyes widened. Are you certain the general will be armed? I'm certain. Above them, the crowd's noise grew louder. Morrison could hear Queen Zarathik's voice echoing through the arena as she addressed the assembled HFY. He couldn't understand the words, but he could guess what she was saying. It is time, Vextar said. Morrison was led up a stone staircase to the arena floor. The moment he stepped into the sunlight, the crowd fell silent. 10,000 pairs of yellow eyes stared down at him. He had never felt so small in his life. Queen Zarathik sat on a throne that had been placed at the arena's edge. She raised her hand, and her voice carried across the courtyard. Citizens of the HFY Empire, today you witness the final test of the human species. If their champion falls, we will know that humans are weak and unworthy of our attention. If somehow he survives, we will know that they are strong enough to be our enemies. The crowd erupted in approval. Morrison noticed that none of the cheering sounded like they expected him to win. Now, the Queen continued, I present the greatest warrior in our history. Undefeated in 300 battles, killer of the Void Serpents, conqueror of the Iron Tribes, General Thokvar. The arena shook as the crowd roared. A gate on the opposite side of the arena opened, and General Thokvar stepped out. Morrison had thought the other Sci-Fi were large, but Thokvar was in a class by himself. He stood at least 8 feet tall, and his body was covered in scars. That told the story of countless battles. His scales were darker than the others, almost black, and they looked thick enough to stop bullets. His arms were as big around as Morrison's waist, but it was Thokvar's eyes that made Morrison's blood run cold. They were the eyes of someone who had never known fear, never felt doubt, never considered the possibility of defeat. They were the eyes of a perfect killer. The general carried a massive weapon that looked like a cross between a hammer and an axe. The metal gleamed in the sunlight, and Morrison could see chips and scratches from previous battles. How many enemies had died under that weapon? Human, Thokvar's voice boomed across the arena. I've heard that your species thinks itself clever. Today, you will learn that cleverness means nothing against true strength. Morrison walked to the center of the arena, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The two fighters faced each other across 10 feet of sand. The rules are simple, Queen Zarathic announced. "Fight until one yields or dies. There's no other way to end this battle." Morrison looked up at the watching crowd. He could see Dr. Carter and Lieutenant Hayes in the royal section, their faces pale with worry. He thought about Earth, about the billions of people who would never know what happened here if he failed. "Begin!" The Queen shouted. Thokvar moved faster than Morrison had thought possible. For something so large, the general was incredibly quick. His weapon whistled through the air in a strike that would have crushed Morrison's skull, but Morrison wasn't there. He had rolled to the side at the last second, coming up in a crouch as the weapon smashed into the sand where he had been standing. The crowd gasped. They had expected the human to be killed in the first few seconds. Thokvar spun around, his weapon already moving in another deadly arc. Morrison jumped backward, the weapon missing him by inches. He could feel the wind from its passage. "You cannot run forever, human." Thokvar snarled. Morrison didn't reply. He was too busy studying his opponent's movements. Every fighter had patterns, habits, weaknesses. Even the greatest warriors made mistakes. Thokvar attacked again, this time with a series of strikes that forced Morrison to dodge desperately around the arena. The general's weapon was everywhere, smashing into the sand, the walls, the stone seats. Pieces of broken stone flew through the air. Morrison noticed something. Thokvar's attacks were powerful, but they followed a pattern. The general had learned to fight against opponents who either fled in terror or tried to match his strength directly. He wasn't used to someone who would dodge and wait. "Stand still and fight." Thokvar roared, frustrated that his attacks kept missing. "Why?" Morrison asked, still moving. "You're doing fine without my help," the crowd murmured at this. They had never heard anyone speak to their greatest warrior that way. Thokvar's attacks became wilder, more desperate. Morrison could see anger building in the general's eyes. Good. Angry fighters made mistakes. Morrison began to talk as he dodged. "You know, General, I've been watching your technique. It's impressive, but it has some problems." Silence. Thokvar swung his weapon in a wide circle, trying to catch Morrison no matter which way he moved. Morrison ducked under the swing and rolled between the general's legs. "For instance, you leave your left side open every time you attack with an overhead strike?" Thokvar spun around, his weapon coming down where Morrison had been a split second before. "I will crush you like an insect." "And you always follow a horizontal swing with a vertical one," Morrison continued, staying just out of reach. Very predictable. The crowd was getting restless. They had come to see a battle, not a dance. Some began to boo, but Morrison ignored them. He was learning everything he needed to know about his opponent. Thokvar's attacks grew even more wild. Morrison could see that the general was getting tired. That massive weapon was heavy, and swinging it over and over was exhausting even for someone with Thokvar's strength. "You also telegraph your attacks," Morrison said, rolling away from another strike. "I can see what you're going to do 3 seconds before you do it." "Enough!" Thokvar threw his weapon aside and charged at Morrison with his bare hands. "I will tear you apart." Morrison had been waiting for this. He let Thokvar get close, then stepped aside at the last moment. The general's momentum carried him into the arena wall with a crash that shook the entire structure. Thokvar bounced off the wall and turned around, his eyes now glowing with rage. "You think you are clever? Human? You think your tricks will save you?" Morrison smiled. "I think you're about to find out." Thokvar picked up his weapon and raised it high above his head. "This ends now." Morrison watched as the general prepared for what was clearly meant to be a finishing blow. The weapon came down with all of Thokvar's strength behind it, fast enough to split Morrison in half, but Morrison had been studying that particular attack for the entire fight. He knew exactly when to move, exactly where to step, exactly how to time his counter. The massive weapon slammed into the sand where Morrison had been standing. But Morrison was no longer there. He had moved to the side and grabbed something from the arena wall. "You dropped this," Morrison said, holding up a piece of metal debris that had broken off during the fight. Thokvar looked up from his embedded weapon, confusion in his eyes. "What?" Now you'll see why underestimating humans was a mistake, Morrison said quietly. The arena fell completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. The arena remained silent for what felt like forever. 10,000 Kephani stared in shock at their greatest warrior kneeling in the sand before a human half his size. Morrison stood over General Thokvar, the metal shard still in his hand, breathing hard from the fight. Queen Zarathik rose from her throne, her red eyes burning with an emotion Morrison couldn't identify. Was it anger? Surprise? Something else entirely? General Thokvar has yielded, she announced, her voice carrying across the silent arena. The human has won the third challenge. The crowd erupted in confused voices. Some Kephani cheered, impressed by the unexpected victory. Others looked angry, as if Morrison had somehow cheated. Most just seemed stunned that their legendary champion had been defeated. Morrison helped Thokvar to his feet. The general was twice his size, but something had changed in his yellow eyes. The absolute confidence was gone, replaced by something Morrison recognized as curiosity. How? Thokvar asked quietly. How did you know what I would do? Experience, Morrison replied. Humans have faced many different enemies. We learned that survival isn't about being the strongest, it's about being the smartest. Thokvar nodded, slowly, as if this was a new concept for him. You fought with honor, human. I respect that. Queen Zarathik descended from her throne and walked into the arena. The crowd fell silent again, waiting to see what their ruler would do. You have passed all 3 challenges, she said to Morrison. This has never happened before. No alien species has ever completed the trial of 3 challenges. Morrison wiped sweat from his face and tried to catch his breath. Does this mean we can begin real peace negotiations? The Queen's smile was cold and sharp. It means you are more dangerous than we thought. Before Morrison could ask what she meant, Queen Zarathik raised her hand. Guards appeared from all around the arena, surrounding Morrison. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, all pointed at him. Your people are too clever, the Queen continued. Too adaptable. Too surprising. Species like yours have a way of becoming problems for empires like ours. Morrison felt his heart sink. So this was all a lie. You never intended to make peace. Peace is for equals, the Queen said. We needed to understand what humans truly are. Now we know. You are a threat that must be eliminated before you become too strong. General Thokvar struggled to his feet, pulling his weapon from the sand. Your Majesty, this human fought with honor. Surely that counts for something. It counts for everything, the Queen replied. It proves that humans are exactly the kind of enemy we cannot allow to grow stronger. Morrison looked around at the circle of weapons pointed at him. Dr. Carter and Lieutenant Hayes were being held by guards in the royal section. There was no way out. However, Queen Zarathik continued, you have earned the right to face me in single combat. If you can defeat me, your people will be spared. If you fail, the Kephani fleet will destroy every human world we can find. Morrison stared at her. You're going to wipe out my entire species because we're too good at surviving? Yes, the Queen said simply. It is the way of the galaxy. The strong survive, the weak perish, and the dangerous are eliminated before they can become a problem. The Queen walked to the weapons rack and selected a blade unlike anything Morrison had ever seen. It was 3 feet long and glowed with blue energy that made the air around it shimmer. When she swung it through the air, it left a trail of light behind it. This is a plasma blade, she explained. It can cut through the hull of a starship. Nothing can stop it, nothing can block it, and nothing can survive being struck by it. Morrison looked at the weapon with growing dread. The metal shard in his hand suddenly seemed very small and useless. The rules remain the same, Queen Zarathik announced to the crowd. Fight until one yields or dies. She raised the plasma blade above her head with both hands. The energy field around it grew brighter, and Morrison could feel heat radiating from the weapon even from 10 feet away. Any last words, human? The Queen asked. Morrison thought about Earth, about his family, about the billions of people who would die if he failed here. He thought about Dr. Carter and Lieutenant Hayes, who had trusted him to get them home safely. He thought about all the things he should have said and done differently. "Just one thing," Morrison said. "You should have asked more questions about human military technology." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Morrison smiled grimly. "You'll find out." Queen Zarathic brought the plasma blade down in a devastating overhead strike. The weapon moved faster than lightning, its energy field crackling through the air. It was aimed directly at Morrison's head, designed to split him in half from top to bottom. The entire arena held its breath. This was it. The human's impossible luck had finally run out, but then something happened that no one expected. Morrison caught the blade with his bare hand. The plasma weapon stopped inches from his head, its deadly energy field contained within Morrison's grip. The Queen's eyes went wide with shock. The crowd gasped as one, unable to believe what they were seeing. "Impossible," Queen Zarathic whispered. "Nothing can touch a plasma blade. Nothing can stop it." Morrison's hand should have been burned away instantly. The energy field should have cut through his flesh like it was made of paper. But his hand remained steady and unharmed, gripping the blade that had never been stopped before. "Now you'll see why that was a mistake," Morrison said quietly. The truth was more complex than the watching Kethany could understand. Morrison wasn't just a diplomatic commander. His uniform wasn't just made of normal fabric. And his hands weren't just ordinary human hands. Years ago, during the Titan Wars, Morrison had been a combat engineer working in the most dangerous environments humanity had ever encountered. Automated mining machines had gone rogue, turning entire asteroid belts into war zones. The fighting took place in zero gravity, in extreme temperatures, and around energy sources that could kill with a touch. To survive, human soldiers had been equipped with the most advanced technology Earth could produce. Morrison's uniform contained microfibers that could adapt to different threats. His hands had been enhanced with a thin layer of programmable matter that could change its properties based on what it encountered. But, most importantly, Morrison had spent the last 3 days studying Kethany technology. While the Queen thought he was just a scared diplomat, he had been analyzing their weapons, their armor, and their energy systems. The plasma blade worked by containing superheated gas in an electromagnetic field. Morrison had noticed that all Kethany energy weapons used the same basic frequency. His uniform's defensive systems had been quietly mapping that frequency since the moment he arrived on Catha Prime. Now, those systems activated. The programmable matter in his hands shifted its molecular structure to match the plasma blade's energy field. Instead of trying to stop the weapon, Morrison's hand became compatible with it. The blade's energy flowed around his fingers harmlessly, like water around a stone. "How?" Queen Zarathic demanded, trying to pull the weapon free. But Morrison's grip was firm. "Human military engineers are very good at solving problems," Morrison said. "We've learned that every weapon has a weakness. Every defense can be overcome. Every enemy can be defeated if you understand how they work." Morrison's other hand moved to his uniform's collar. Hidden there was a small device that most people would mistake for a decoration. But it was actually an electromagnetic pulse generator, designed to disrupt enemy electronics. Morrison activated the device. The plasma blade's energy field flickered and died. The weapon that could cut through starship hulls became nothing more than an expensive piece of metal. Queen Zarathic stared at her powerless weapon in disbelief. "This cannot be. Our technology is the most advanced in the galaxy." "Your technology is impressive," Morrison agreed, taking the dead weapon from her hands. "But it's not perfect." "Nothing is perfect. That's the first thing human engineers learn." The arena had fallen completely silent. The Queen, the greatest ruler in Kethany history, stood weaponless before a human she had tried to kill. Morrison looked around at the thousands of watching aliens. "Your Majesty, I think it's time we had that conversation about real peace negotiations." Queen Zarathic's red eyes burned with a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. "You planned this from the beginning." "We hoped it wouldn't be necessary," Morrison said. "But humans learned long ago to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." General Thokvar stepped forward, his own weapon lowered. Human Morrison speaks truth, Your Majesty. His people are not what we thought they were. The Queen looked around at her assembled nobles, all of whom were staring at Morrison with new understanding. The human hadn't just defeated their greatest warrior and their most advanced weapon. He had done it while making it look easy. What do you want? The Queen asked finally. Morrison smiled. The same thing we wanted when we arrived 3 days ago. To talk, but now everyone understood that the conversation would be very different from what anyone had expected. Queen Zarathik stood in the center of the arena, her most powerful weapon useless in her hands. The silence stretched on as 10,000 Kethani tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Their queen, their technology, their entire way of thinking about strength had just been challenged by a species they had considered weak. Morrison still held the dead plasma blade, but he made no threatening moves. Instead, he placed the weapon gently on the sand between himself and the Queen. Your Majesty, Morrison said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. I think we both learned something today. You learned that humans are more capable than you thought. I learned that the Kethani are exactly as dangerous as Earth intelligence believed. The Queen's red eyes narrowed. Earth intelligence? You knew about our plans? Morrison nodded. We've known about Kethani expansion for months. Your scouts aren't as invisible as you think they are. We've been tracking your ships, monitoring your communications, and studying your technology. Dr. Carter and Lieutenant Hayes were released by their guards and walked down into the arena. Carter carried a small device that Morrison recognized as a quantum communicator. The diplomatic mission was real, Carter said, joining the conversation, but it was also a reconnaissance operation. We needed to understand Kethani capabilities before your fleet reached human space. Lieutenant Hayes added, every scan I took, every security check I ran, every guard position I memorized was being sent back to Earth Command. Our people know exactly where we are and what's happening here? Queen Zarathik looked around at her nobles, many of whom appeared shocked by these revelations. You dare to spy on the Kethani Empire? We dare to protect ourselves, Morrison replied. Humans have faced extinction before. We've fought against environmental disasters, artificial intelligences that turned against us, alien invasions and civil wars that nearly destroyed our civilization. Each time we survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and more determined than our enemies expected. General Thokvar stepped forward. What the human says makes sense, Your Majesty. In 300 battles, I have never faced an enemy who fought the way he did. His tactics were unlike anything in our military books. Morrison looked at the general with respect. That's because human combat doctrine isn't based on individual strength or honor. It's based on survival at any cost. We study our enemies, we adapt to their weaknesses, and we use every advantage we can find. But you could have killed me, the Queen said, confusion in her voice. When you disabled my weapon, you could have struck me down. Why didn't you? Morrison smiled. Because killing you wouldn't solve the real problem. The Kethani Empire has dozens of worlds and millions of warriors. Earth has learned that making enemies is easy, but making allies is much more valuable. Carter activated her communicator device. Your Majesty, would you like to speak with someone who can explain human capabilities better than we can? The device projected a hologram into the air above the arena. The image showed a human woman in military uniform, sitting in what looked like a spaceship command center. Greetings, Queen Zarathik, the hologram said. I'm Admiral Sarah Johnson, commander of the Earth Defense Fleet. I believe you've been getting acquainted with some of my people. The Queen stared at the hologram. Earth has a military fleet? We have several, Admiral Johnson replied. Right now, the Third Fleet is positioned at the edge of your star system. They've been there for 6 hours, waiting for my signal. Morrison could see the shock on the faces of the watching Kethani. Their supposedly invisible empire had been infiltrated and surrounded without them knowing. The Fifth Fleet is near your mining colonies in the Outer Rim, the Admiral continued. The Seventh Fleet is monitoring your shipyards at Kethver Station. We know the location of every major Kethani military installation. Queen Zarathik's voice was barely a whisper. How many ships? Enough, Admiral Johnson said simply. But we didn't come here to fight, Your Majesty. We came here to talk. The question is, are you interested in conversation, or should I give the order to defend ourselves? The arena erupted in panicked voices as Kethany nobles realized their empire was surrounded by an enemy they had never seen coming. Guards looked to their officers for orders. Officers looked to their generals. Generals looked to their queen. Zarathic raised her hand, and silence fell again. Admiral Johnson, your people have demonstrated remarkable capabilities. What do you want from us? The same thing Commander Morrison told you 3 days ago, the Admiral replied. Trade, cooperation, and mutual defense against the real threats in this galaxy. Morrison stepped forward. Your Majesty, the Kethany Empire is impressive, but it's not the most dangerous thing in space. According to our deep space monitors, there are things moving in the dark between the stars. Ancient machines that make your warriors look like children. Energy beings that can destroy entire solar systems. We've detected signals from species so alien that we can't even understand what they are. Dr. Carter nodded. Humanity has learned that survival depends on cooperation. The challenges we face are too big for any one species to handle alone. The Kethany are strong, but humans are adaptable. Together we might actually have a chance. General Thokvar spoke up. Your Majesty, these humans have shown us new ways of thinking about warfare and survival. Perhaps we have been too focused on individual strength and not enough on collective wisdom. Queen Zarathic was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Morrison could see her weighing options, calculating risks, considering possibilities that had never occurred to her before. Admiral Johnson, the Queen said finally, if we agree to these negotiations, what guarantee do we have that humans won't use their knowledge of our empire against us? The same guarantee we're asking from you, Admiral Johnson replied. Mutual. Trust, verified by mutual benefit. We share technology, you share resources. We defend each other against external threats. We both get stronger, and we both survive whatever's coming. Morrison picked up the dead plasma blade and offered it back to Queen Zarathic. Your Majesty, this weapon is incredible. With some modifications? To make it more reliable, it could be exactly what human soldiers need. In exchange, our programmable matter technology could make Kethany armor virtually impenetrable. The Queen took the weapon, studying Morrison's face. You would share your military secrets with former enemies? We would share them with new allies, Morrison corrected. Humans learned a long time ago that today's enemy can become tomorrow's friend if both sides are smart enough to recognize mutual benefit. Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward. Your Majesty, I've seen your warriors fight. They're brave, strong, and honorable. But they fight like each battle is separate from every other battle. Humans have learned to think in terms of campaign strategies that span years or decades. Together, we could create military doctrines that combine Kethany strength with human tactics. Dr. Carter added, and the scientific possibilities are endless. Kethany crystal technology combined with human nanotechnology could create materials we've never imagined. Your understanding of energy manipulation could help us solve problems that have puzzled our scientists for generations. Queen Zarathic looked around the arena at her people. Morrison could see that many of the nobles were nodding in agreement. The demonstration of human capabilities had impressed them, but the promise of shared knowledge excited them. Admiral Johnson, the Queen, sighed. I propose a formal alliance between the Kethany Empire and Earth. We will share technology, coordinate defense, and face the unknown dangers of the galaxy together. Accepted, Admiral Johnson replied immediately. I'll order my fleets to withdraw to a safe distance while we work out the details. The arena erupted in cheers. Kethany voices mixed with the sounds of approval from the holographic image of the Human Fleet Command Center. Morrison walked over to General Thokvar and extended his hand. General, I'd be honored to learn Kethany combat techniques. Maybe you'd be interested in learning some human tactics? Thokvar grasped Morrison's hand with his massive claws. Human Morrison, I believe this is the beginning of a very interesting friendship. Queen Zarathic approached Morrison, her expression serious, but not hostile. Commander, your people have taught me something important today. Strength isn't just about winning battles. It's about knowing when not to fight them, Morrison smiled. Your Majesty, I think you're going to fit in very well with human diplomatic philosophy. Dr. Carter was already talking excitedly with several Cathany scientists about crystal technology. Lieutenant Hayes was discussing defensive strategies with Cathany military officers. Admiral Johnson was coordinating with Cathany fleet commanders through the hologram dot. As Morrison watched his team working with their former enemies, he thought about how much had changed in just a few days. They had come to Ketha Prime expecting simple trade negotiations. Instead, they had found themselves in the middle of a test that could have led to war, but humans had done what humans did best. They had adapted, survived, and turned potential enemies into allies. Commander Morrison, Queen Zarathic said, I have one final question. Yes, Your Majesty? Your species has clearly been preparing for this encounter for months. You knew our capabilities, our weaknesses, and our intentions. But there's one thing I don't understand.